Well, we'd like to revise some of the more important things that we went through in our introductory Excel course. The first spreadsheet that I've opened here is one we looked at called a loan calculator. The first thing to notice here is that whoever designed this sheet, and it came from the Microsoft site, has hidden the grid-like arrangement of the rows and columns and the intersecting the cells. They've also put a fair amount of effort into laying the spreadsheet out nicely, and we've emphasised the value of that. If we enter in the amount of a loan, in this case, $1 million loan, notice that the formatting behind that cell is automatic. As soon as we enter the number, in goes the appropriate format. So that's really important, to set your spreadsheets up well and to have the calculations that go on behind the sheet work well, but also to format the information that's going in. This designer of this spreadsheet has also put the outputs which will appear in these cells as given a colour. I've formatted the cell and given it a colour, and there's a split in the screen so that below the intersection of 17 and 18 rows you can scroll down as the spreadsheet calculates. So we looked at that quite early on in our learning. We then turned to a little exercise in which you showed quite clearly that Excel is a very powerful sorting tool. The previous exercise, Excel was manipulating numbers. Now we can manipulate a list of text. So to sort a list of class names, it's just a matter of clicking in the column that you want, clicking a sort ascending, and the ascending sort on surname appears. We then moved to another important area, I think, which is to be able to manipulate your view. This particular spreadsheet we called split window, and there's information off in the columns after to the right of the September column, which we can't see, and we taught you to click into a cell toward the left and then go window and split somewhere. Here we go. I had to wait for the adaptive menu to drop, click window and split, and now we are able to scroll across and we can see November and December's data. Without going into it, we also taught you to hide particular columns and hide particular rows. So those skills that we would expect that you have. We looked at formatting generally. I've touched on that briefly, but a column of data such as this isn't good. We would want all numbers in that column formatted correctly, so we would go format cells, pick number, and make it 2 decimal places so that all the numbers are aligned in a sensible way. Once we'd done that, we then began to emphasize that the power of spreadsheets occurred in the formula that were embedded in the sheet, and we had you change a number in a balance sheet in that cell there, and you saw the number being reflected down here. The reason that occurs is that in a number of cells here there are formulae. The formula in this particular cell here in cell C7 says equal sum of the range C5 to C6, and it's the formula in a spreadsheet that provides the power. We showed you that with the Control and Grave accent key you could expose the formula in a spreadsheet. You will notice down in this cell here the notation $B $19, and we certainly covered what I called relative cell references and absolute cell reference. So cell reference B19 is an absolute cell reference. We would expect that by this stage of your learning you are on top of absolute and relative cell references. Let's use the Control and Graph key and put that back. We then moved to an income sheet, and again showed you that there are ways, or Excel has mechanisms for automatically generating some of these formulae, and we certainly emphasize the value of that auto sum feature, generating the formula in there, and then the ability to drag across to the right to auto-fill, and we spent quite a lot of time on auto-fill. We then said that Excel is a wonderful tool for showing the average non-technical, I was going to use the term non-technical, but I mean non-accounting person, because you can take a whole set of numbers like this, which are relatively difficult to interpret, and turn this share portfolio into a chart. So here's a chart showing now the user the value of their portfolio. In this case, Microsoft, the holding in Microsoft shares is worth far more than the holding in, say, Peptech shares. So the ability to draw charts easily, to label axes and so on, we covered. Finally, we began talking about functions, and we showed you that it's possible to, we'd already used the auto sum function in that cell there, but it was also possible to use some of these other functions that are in Excel, the average function, the minimum function, and the max function, and even the count function to measure the values in those cells. And we emphasized the need to look very closely at your spreadsheet and watch very carefully, making sure that you don't leave blank cells in there, because division by zero, well, you can leave a blank cell, but you don't put zeros in there, because that clearly will affect the number of costs, and in this case the average. So you need to be very careful when you are designing and laying out your sheets. So that, in a very brief way, should reinforce what we covered in that earlier course. Now, if you're at all uncomfortable with that, please ask us to go back over some of those features. We'd expect that you understand relative and absolute cell references, charting, putting formulae in, and using functions. And to one thing we haven't covered here is the ability, we showed you how to lock formulae in a spreadsheet so that people can't alter the spreadsheet that you're using. But I think that's enough. That covers our earlier course material.